Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. The United States and Iran appear to be moving closer to a wider conflict. President Trump has vowed to keep striking Iran, while the U.S. has resumed its naval blockade and announced plans to charge transit fees for ships using the Strait of Hormuz, a move that has sparked international criticism. With military pressure mounting and President Trump set to deliver a national address later this week, attention is now turning to whether Washington is preparing for a longer campaign or whether there is still a path back to diplomacy. For more on this, we connect to Robert Lawrence, professor of English and Turkic Studies at Dongduk Women's University. A very big welcome.
Thank you for having me on this evening.
And also joining us is Kim Young-jun, National Security College professor at the Korean National Defense University. Good to see you, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start a discussion first with Professor Lawrence. Let's begin with President Trump's message. He said he'll strike Iran today and tomorrow while calling the ceasefire MOU a little more than a test. Do you think the conflict has now entered a fundamentally new phase?
Well, we're definitely in an escalatory phase. You know, we'll have to wait and see how things develop to know if it's new or if it's more cyclical. You know, if there's an expansion of the target list, or if the conflict spills over into the broader region, or if it even spills beyond the region, as Iran has threatened to do, then maybe we're looking at a new phase. You know, a lot's unfolding as we speak. So by the time we wake up tomorrow morning, we might be looking at a different situation. But there are a couple of developments, I think, that are flying under the radar that need to be addressed. You know, one, Donald Trump sent a letter to Congress on July 10th stating that, you know, officially letting them know that strikes began on July 7th to protect Americans and U.S. interests. Now, what that does is, you know, the administration is going to argue that this gives them 60 more days to operate without congressional approval, since he had already written them in early May that the war with Iran had officially terminated. I'm sure that many in Congress are going to reject this argument. There's going to be a lot of pushback. But I think the administration is going to maintain that this gives them a new 60-day period in which to operate without congressional approval. This is important because I think for all intents and purposes, and right or wrong, it kind of eliminates a congressional restraint for the time being anyway, assuming that Congress won't really have the bandwidth right now to challenge him on it. Additionally, in the last 24 hours, the Houthis fired 8 missiles, as the last time I counted, into Saudi Arabia in retaliation for a strike on the Sana'a airport at which an Iranian plane was trying to land, or a plane from Iran was trying to land. You know, the Houthis blamed the Saudis, they retaliated, and then they threatened more retaliation. So I think it's going to be crucial to see how the Iranians, the Houthis, and the Saudis all react to this development, because it could broaden the scope of the conflict. For example, the Saudis could retaliate against the strikes from the Houthis, or the Iranians or Houthis could send you know, more strikes into Saudi Arabia. Furthermore, the Houthis could, you know, because of this, and as well with the U.S. blockade of Iran in the Strait of Hormuz, they could use this as an encouragement to maybe cause some more trouble in the Red Sea. There's a lot of oil that's bypassing the Strait of Hormuz by going out through the East-West pipeline across Saudi Arabia, then going out the Bab al-Mandab through the Red Sea, through the Bab al-Mandab, and over to Asia. So if the Houthis decide to engage in the Red Sea, this could be, you know, an energy security problem that could have global ramifications. Mm-hmm. So right now, it seems like we're in a position of controlled escalation, but, you know, the law of unintended consequences probably suggests that we need to wait and see how things develop in the coming days and weeks, maybe.
Right, definitely. So we're seeing a lot of factors playing into the current situation. Mm-hmm. But if you go back to the latest strikes by the U.S., Washington targeted Iran's missile and naval capabilities rather than its nuclear facilities. Professor Kim, what does that tell us about the military strategy of Washington?
It is very natural because the targeting nuclear facility will be the disaster, especially for the civilian casualties. So main strategy objective of the U.S. by targeting naval and missile capability is to lead the Iranian agreement to nuclear negotiation that the U.S. wanted. over the weeks, the U.S. President Donald Trump has shown dissatisfaction over Iranian approach to negotiation deal packages. So the U.S. wanted Iran to give up their nuclear enrichment fuel facility and kind of the weapons then and duty for inspection. But Iranian has hesitated to accept this kind of a requirement from the U.S. So this limited attack, like the including naval capability or missile site aiming at the Iranians' participation on nuclear deals that the U.S. has set. But Iran seems to not give up their nuclear capability, including fuel, material, and facilities. So this conflict will be continue for a while, and nobody knows when will be start at this time.
Right. But meanwhile, on the side of Iran, it has also stepped up a pressure on U.S. bases and Gulf allies across the region. How much of a challenge do you think that could pose for the United States?
It seems at the moment the U.S. wanted to the deal with Iran as soon as possible, but Iran want all Gulf states to join this extended war and extend this conflict in for the longer war because of Iran wanted to the longer conflict to lure the U.S. as long as possible in this region. Iran expect the someday American people will sick and tired of this Middle East participation and give up their participation in this issue. So they expect the American people want to withdraw its U.S. forces from the Middle East as soon as possible. That's why Iran does not want to have any reason to hurry up this negotiation package war, kind of a shortage war. So, but the U.S. wanted to have a deal as soon as possible to end this conflict in this region and deal negotiation package as well. So Iran want to have a more advantage over the Strait by using a deal with the U.S. and the U.S. has a very difficult situation to stop this the conflict as soon as possible. So the U.S. midterm election is coming in this November. Iran has more advantage over the time frame.
More ways to apply pressure, indeed. Now, if we shift a little bit to the Strait of Hormuz, the United States has resumed its naval blockade and even proposed charging ships a 20% transit fee. Professor Lawrence, how could that change the balance of leverage between Washington and Tehran?
This is really the crux of the issue, the Strait of Hormuz is. The two states have competing interpretations of Article 5 of the MOU, and this is what's led to the recent escalation. Currently, the Strait of Hormuz is the strategic center of gravity, and disrupting the freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz is the Iranians' biggest strategic asset. So controlling and leveraging the strait through kind of asymmetric warfare and basically patience could be a significant source of revenue and leverage in the international arena for the Iranians. The U.S. obviously does not see this as a feasible outcome, and that's why they've resumed strikes on storage and launch sites. And they're doing this to degrade Iran's ability to impede the free flow of traffic. The strait's also where Iran's vulnerable for its own oil exports that make up a considerable amount of government revenue. So, resuming this naval blockade is significant because even though the blockade wasn't 100% successful last time, Iran was able to sneak some ships through. It still costs billions of dollars, up to $6 billion in 1 month, according to, I think, Al Jazeera in one report. It created a storage crisis and it caused significant, financial strain in general to the country. So this is an effective tactic. But the critical value of the blockade, it may come down to strategic discipline and pain tolerance because it's going to hurt everybody involved. Regarding the 20% fee that President Trump has proposed, I think that there are a lot of logistical hurdles to actually make this happen. I'm not sure that it isn't just kind of hyperbole, given what some of the recent statements from Secretary Marco Rubio and Ambassador Waltz in the UN. So, time will tell, but I think that there are a lot of hurdles with this, and I think there's going to be a great deal of pushback from the international community, basically from everybody in the business community as well.
Right. As you've mentioned, it's really going to hurt everybody involved, and that proposal really has drawn international criticism. Then, Professor Lawrence, how could this affect America's relations with its allies and the broader international community?
Well, the U.S. has been rallying the international community against the Iranians imposing fees and obstructing the freedom of navigation through the Straits for months. So, while the naval blockade of Iran, it's in accordance to the law of naval warfare, there's really no legal basis for the U.S. imposing a fee on the Strait of Hormuz. This would encourage the Iranians to do the same. And it would also, encourage their claim that there is ownership of what the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea considers to be an international waterway. In fact, Foreign Minister Arakchi earlier on today agreed with President Trump in saying that, countries that do guarantee safe passage deserve compensation. So, while Donald Trump is predictably unpredictable, I think this is not a serious goal of his. This would be awfully ambitious for one to even try to do it. It would hurt the U.S. argument against Iran doing the same. It would be very difficult, if not impossible, to maintain indefinitely. And it wouldn't sit well with any of our allies. So, I think this is probably a part of a negotiation tactic rather than an actual policy.
But if we look ahead, there's going to be another ambitious plan. The U.S. says it's prepared to expand its air campaign as well. Professor Kim, do you think Washington has the weapons and stockpile to sustain a broader operation?
For the short term, the U.S. has enough capability and capacity to target Iranian military facility by using their air campaign. Air campaign means not just total war, it's a limited attack for the short term. So American people does not support the longer war with Iran. So the U.S. will do short and very strong limited attack to Iran by using maximum pressure rather than a longer war by using grounded forces. So of course the U.S. does not have unlimited ammunition, and Iran has the same issue. The U.S. operation will be short but very strong, but it is uncertain whether it will be successful or not to deal with Iran because of Iran has more the advantage over the time frame. So the U.S. air campaign will be very short-term, strong attack to a limited target of the Iran.
Right, so a very uncertain situation that we're seeing right now. But in just a couple of days, we're expecting President Trump to make an address later this week, with many expecting him to outline the next phase of the U.S. policy towards Iran. Then what should we be watching for, Professor Lawrence? And do you still see any realistic path towards diplomacy?
I'm sure he'll address a number of issues, but regarding Iran, I think it'll be interesting to see if he offers clear justification and objectives. This is something that the administration was heavily criticized for not clearly providing enough of in February and March. And I think, the narrative was lost in the information space because of this deficit in clear communication. There were a lot of people within his own base that were not and are not happy with the decision to engage in Iran in February. And they maintained that it strayed away from his America First agenda. So with the midterms coming up and the Republicans having small majorities in both the House and the Senate, and frankly, the House doesn't look particularly good for the Republicans right now. I think he'll want to control the narrative much better than he did earlier in the year. Regarding returning to diplomacy, both sides seem to be leaving the door open for diplomacy, which is good, but they're doing so in kind of a controlled escalation of kinetic warfare. So that makes, that complicates actually getting back to the table a great deal. There's also, a lot of potential for missteps to lead to uncontrolled escalation right now. So in this environment, I doubt either side is willing to show weakness and kind of rush back to the table too quickly. Though it does appear that neither side wants to return to where we were in early March. Eventually people are going to have to talk, but whether and for whom time is an asset or a vulnerability is a big question right now. So I don't expect any big change to happen immediately. both sides are going to try to demonstrate that they aren't fazed by the escalation. And again, it might come down to who has the greater strategic focus and pain tolerance.
Right. So as Professor Lawrence just pointed out, it seems both sides want to avoid an all-out war, but tensions, of course, are rising continuously. Then, Professor Kim, what do you think is the biggest risk for further escalation?
Yes, that's the dilemma. Both the U.S. and Iran do not want to extend the war and do not want any longer war, but nobody knows whether this limited conflict became a longer war or bigger war. And the biggest factor will be maybe Israel. Israel want to change the Middle East security environment by maximum pressure on Iran and Hezbollah by this time. Thus, it is uncertain when this conflict will be stopped and when Israel and Iran stop their conflict. So the U.S. may live in a short term in some day, but Middle East conflict will be continuous. So Israel attack on Iran or Hezbollah will be the biggest factor in deciding the further escalation.
A concerning situation and scenario indeed. So if we look beyond the military situation, Professor Lawrence, the U.S.'s naval blockade, the transit fee for ships in the Strait of Hormuz, all of this, what impact could it have on the global economy?
Well, if this were to go into effect, it would have a very bad effect on the world economy. According to the Financial Times today, it's going to add approximately $32 million to every supertanker going through the strait. Naturally, this is going to lead to increased oil prices. We've already seen a bit of a spike in oil prices in the last couple of days, and it would have cause a negative supply shock. We would have higher cost of food, transportation, and manufacturing, leading to inflation, and which would lower economic output and global growth as a whole. So, in addition to all the economic consequences in implementing this policy, the U.S. would become guilty of what it has accused Iran of illegally trying to do for months. So, again, I don't think that this 20% fee is likely to come into effect. Maybe it's something that we're going to see the president address on Friday night here in Korea, Friday morning here in Korea, Thursday night in the U.S. But, though he's not necessarily someone scared of unorthodox foreign policy, I think that this is a bridge too far. I think this is more likely a tool to throw everybody off balance, as he kind of has a tendency to do.
So it could be rather a strategic message than a real action plan moving forward. But finally, before we conclude our discussion tonight, so Iran's new leadership is now formally in place following Ayatollah Khamenei's funeral. Professor Kim, what message do you think Tehran is trying to send, and how could it impact the current overall situation?
There was a huge impact over the funeral ceremony. Then the anti-U.S. campaign was very strong, and "Killing Trump" slogan became main slogan among Iranian people. Iranian regime, definitely will use this kind of anti-U.S. movement for their long-term dictatorship and press any democratic and anti-regime movement for a while. To Iranian regime, this will be a great chance to maintain their dictatorship for next decade, and they will use this as long as possible for their interests. So that is the kind of a turning point for the more difficult situation between Iran and the U.S. But Iranian regime does not want any kind of a short deal, and the U.S. want to stop this kind of the conflict as soon as possible. So this type of a funeral ceremony anti-U.S. movement is a very difficult the hurdle for the negotiation going ahead.
So we will be watching closely to see what this new leadership means for the future of the conflict as well. That's where we have to leave our discussion tonight. Professor Kim, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
And of course, Professor Lawrence, we really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.